Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be talking today about academic writing, and in particular we're going to look at the conventions of academic writing. We're going to look at analysing the question, which I think is one of the most important things that you can do. It helps you when you have a piece of writing from the very beginning to stay on track. So one of the comments that students quite often get is, you haven't answered the question properly. And that's probably because you haven't read the question and analysed the question properly. Analysing the question will help you to stay on track with your answer, and it will help you to stay on track with your research. So I'll give you a method for doing that. We're looking at the importance of structuring work and how you might be able to go about doing that. And then we're going to look at how you can use evidence to support your arguments, and from there referencing and plagiarism issues. So let's make a start, and actually to begin with I want you to do some work. So what I have here is I've got a couple of pieces of academic writing here, introductions to essays. What I'd like you to do is have a look through both of them, and then with the person closest to you, I'd like you to discuss it. I'd like you to look at their strengths, their weaknesses, and think about how they might be improved. So if you were marking these pieces, what would you say as a marker? Being one of those markers that gives constructive criticisms, how could you improve this? How could you improve this piece? You got one? Okay, shall we have a chat together? What do you think of the first one in terms of its academic writing? Do we like it? Yeah. Do we love it? Is there anything that can be improved with this one? What do you like about it?
It's evidence supported.
Okay, it's evidence-based writing, so the statements are backed up with some references there. Yep. What else? Okay, it's got a nice flow to it. That's an introduction to an essay, and quite a good way of writing an introduction to an essay is to think of it as an upside-down triangle, where you start off with general information, so introduction to the topic, importance of the topic, and then you get down to what the actual essay is going to say. So you get down to the specifics. So it does that. It's got a nice shape to it. Anything else?
It gives you a flavour of the background.
Gives you some background, yes, it gives you enough background for you to be able to understand what the author is going to say next, what the essay is about.
Clearly states the purpose.
States the purpose of the essay, yep.
There's no sort of assumption made at that stage. It's all like, I'll tell you this, I'll tell you that, and then we'll decide.
Okay, yeah, and it's very, very clear, isn't it? Yeah. So the clarity of what is going to happen is there for that introduction. Is there anything that you would improve in that introduction?
I might include a definition of the terms I'm going to be using.
Okay, if you're using terms in a specific way, or very specific terms that you think the reader wouldn't understand, then you might need a definition. It depends on what you're writing about, whether you need to include definitions or not. But in an essay, you would usually define them in an introduction. The only thing that I could say that for an essay, you see at the end the writer says, finally, a conclusion will identify what type of intervention has the most potential. With an essay, you already know what it is that you want to conclude, and actually for your reader, it's quite good to be specific about that, rather than just an intervention will be identified. You can actually say what your conclusion would be. That's for an essay. If you're writing an introduction to a research protocol, then you don't know what you're going to conclude, so you won't be able to put that in there. But for an essay, you could actually write down the main point that you want to get across in the introduction, and that makes it clearer for your reader. What do we think about the second one?
Formal.
Sorry?
It's quite informal.
It's quite informal in terms of the language. Okay, so you would be expecting to use a more formal tone for this. Anything else?
The first person.
Okay, we've talked about the first. We've used the first person in this introduction. Is it ever okay to use the first person? In reflection, okay. If you've been asked to reflect on something that's happened to you in practice, then you're being asked to write about yourself. So it makes sense to use the first person. But normally speaking, we write in the third person rather than the first. So it's got first person in here. It's a bit informal in tone. Anything else about it that you've noticed?
There's no like references.
There's no references in this one. Mm-hmm. Anything else?
It's a bit broad.
It's a bit.
Statements.
Yes, they're a bit vague, actually, aren't they? At some point, if more people were more physically active, less people would die, and billions of pounds. Perhaps we could be a little bit more specific than that. Could be saved. So yeah, there are some issues with the second one. We've been looking at some examples of academic writing. What I'd like you to do now is to have a chat to your neighbour and write down what you think 5 characteristics of good academic writing are, and 5 things that you think you should avoid when you're producing some academic writing. Okay, shall we have a chat together about it? Because I'm sure we've all got some different ideas. What's one of the characteristics that you think academic writing should have? Research, okay, and enough breadth. So you've said broad research. Yes, you should certainly read around the topic, but once you find your topic, you need to make sure that you're not doing so much that you're covering too much and then not being able to go into things in depth. So we tread a fine line with the amount of topics that we cover in an assignment to make sure that we're able to cover enough in depth. Okay, so research, what else?
And it should be formal.
The tone should be formal. Now, what do we mean by that? We've spoken about that before. What is it to have a formal language? What does that mean? Okay, yeah, it might be better to talk in terms of what you don't have here. So some of the things to avoid. You don't use slang in the writing. What else?
Does it mean somebody without that subject area would be able to understand it? That's a good way to think of the reader. So that's partly to do with the clarity and the background that you need and the assumptions that you make. So it's a really good idea when you're writing assignments to think, this is a smart person who maybe is studying in my field but hasn't studied this. So then you know which terms you need to explain. You know how to target your writing. Okay, so that's to do with the clarity. Let's go back to formal writing. So not using slang terms. What else? Okay, so signposting your language. Again, that's got to do with clarity. That means you're telling your reader what you're going to do. So if you see at the end of that first introduction, because we've got an essay here, and essays usually just flow from the beginning to the end. The writer has actually written something about how the essay is going to be written and what the reader can expect. That's some signposting. Let's go back to the formal tone again. So no slang. No conjunction. Well, we need conjunctions because we might sometimes want to say and. Conjunctions join things. No conjunctions at. Ah, okay. Okay. The thing about conjunctions, they're words that link ideas together. You don't start a sentence with one because you join sentences together with them. So that was the thing about conjunctions. Contractions. Does anyone know what a contraction is? Got an example?
Can't, don't. Yes, absolutely. So that's easy to put into your writing because we use them all the time in speech, and it would sound strange if we didn't. You don't say, I cannot do that. I do not wish to. So you don't do that. But in academic writing, it's considered to be too informal to use contractions, to join the words together with an apostrophe. So you need to just double check in your proofreading that they haven't slipped in, because they're really easy to put into your writing because you think them. Anything else?
And sometimes maybe using a passive voice.
Sometimes using the passive voice, yes. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So yes, that can help you to get rid of things like I think and I believe. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, what else in terms of academic writing? We've talked about the first person and not using the first person unless you are asked to write a reflective piece.
Appropriate citing all sources.
Citing all sources. So good academic writing has a good use of references. Anything else comes to mind?
Justification.
Justification. So again, we have to have evidence for what we say. So anything that you say in academic writing needs to be backed up, and we'll talk about that in a while. We'll talk about that a bit later. Okay, so here's some that I've made earlier. We need to talk in the third person, so have a kind of impersonal stance unless you're writing a reflection. You try to avoid using the word I, we, or even you. We need to avoid colloquialisms and slang, so avoid everyday, the way that we might speak in everyday language. Just make sure that you're having a more formal tone. Avoid abbreviations. There are some abbreviations that are appropriate. ETC is an abbreviation for etc. So, something like that. EG is an abbreviation for example, i.e., that is. But certainly text messaging abbreviations, definitely not for academic writing. So be careful there. We want clear and concise writing, and we need to look at evidence to back up the statements. So just talking about avoiding the first person, in this essay, I will investigate, rather than doing that, it's easy to change that to just this essay will investigate. So you can just take, sometimes to avoid the first person, you can just take the I out. I think that treatment X is a very effective treatment. How about treatment X is a very effective treatment without the I think that, because you're going to provide evidence for believing that statement. To avoid you can treat heart disease by, instead of saying that, heart disease can be treated by, and that's the difference between the active and the passive voice. So you can use that to get rid of I's and U's. Okay, anyone heard of the KISS principle? Keep it short and simple, or keep it simple, sweetheart. I don't mind which way you remember it, but...
Just keep it simple, stupid.
Oh, no, never. So keep it short and simple. What your lecturers are interested in are your ideas and getting across your ideas. So you don't have to write long, complicated sentences, and you don't have to use complicated language. So keeping it short and simple and getting the ideas across is the best way to do things. If you find yourself stuck on a sentence and you think you're maybe trying to sound a bit too academic, and you just can't get the sentence out, step away from it and think, what am I trying to say here? And maybe even use bullet points on a separate page. Write down the bullet points of the ideas. I want to say this, I want to say this, I want to say this. Then make a sentence for each. And that's keeping it short and simple. You don't necessarily need to make the long, complicated sentences. And that goes for not just
students but for academics as well. Good journal articles that are written by academics for academics, the really good ones are written with clear, concise language. They keep it short and simple so that the ideas can be looked at rather than people scratching their heads over the language. Okay, I want to go through different stages that you will need to go through when you are doing some academic writing, when you're producing some kind of assignment. And the very first stage is at analysing the question, because if you go off, do some research without really sitting down and asking yourself what the question means, you might be doing a lot of unnecessary research and really kind of wasting some of your time. So analysing that question is really the first thing to take a look at. Finding your information, reading and note-taking, and while you're reading and note-taking, the idea is that we're not just passively taking the notes from sources, we're thinking all the time, taking notes with questions in mind. How is this going to help me with my assignment? Is this something that I can use for background? Is this something that I can use when I talk about methodology? How is what I'm reading here different from what somebody else has said? So note-taking with questions is a great idea. I've put in a separate thinking stage, but actually as you're note-taking you are doing your thinking, but taking a step back once you've taken notes and thinking about how does this, where are the contrasts, where are the strengths and weaknesses, how is this going to help me to form my answer? So having a stage where you're stepping aside, you're not just writing, but you're thinking about it is a very good idea. So that's where we're looking at analysis and evaluation. And then really, really important, and we're going to look at this in a little while, is planning your work. If you have an assignment to do, and you've done your research and you've got loads of notes, and you sit down at your computer and you start with an empty screen and start to write. Has anyone tried to do this? It is very, very hard. It's very hard, and what will happen is as you're writing, you'll come up with great ideas, and that's fabulous. So you come up with a great idea and you write that down, you come up with another great idea and you write that down, but when you've finished, you've got 4,000 words that are all over the place, with ideas all over the place. So planning your work beforehand can save you from that. Because if you've got 4,000 words with ideas all over the place, it's really hard to then see where the words can go. It's very hard to structure a piece of writing. It's much easier to write from a structure. So get the ideas down. Of course, as you're writing, you'll come up with great ideas. Fabulous. Don't just type them in. Go back to your plan and see where they fit in to your whole, the structure of your assignment. Okay, writing drafts is very important. I don't know, has anybody ever submitted something that they finished the night before and it's just the first thing, the first draft basically? No one's admitting it, but you know, I've done it, probably everybody's done it. The sad thing about not giving yourself enough time, really, this is a time management issue. The sad thing about not having enough time to do drafts is that your lecturer won't see how good you are, because it will never be as good as it can be in the first draft. If you read it again, you will find things. You will find things that you can improve. A professional writer writes 4 drafts of a piece. The first draft is getting their ideas down, and I mean they've still got the plan, right? But they're writing it down and not thinking so much about the person who's reading it. They're just getting down the information that they want to get down, the arguments they want to get down. Then they look at it, they edit their draft, review their draft, and they look for making sure that there isn't irrelevant information. They look to make sure the ideas flow. So they fix that. second time round. The third time round, what they're looking for is now they're thinking about their reader. So they've written 2 drafts and not really thought so much about the person who's going to read it. But by the time they look at the third time, they're looking for the reader's sake. So they're looking for long, complicated sentences that might be difficult to understand. And they're saying, well, what do I really want to say here? Can I say it in a simpler way? Or they're looking for those sentences that you know what they mean. You know what you mean when you write them down. But if someone else read them, they might have a couple of different meanings. So you've got to really be clear for your reader. So third time round, you're looking for your reader and fixing up the language to make it clearer. Fourth time round, you're doing the spell check. You're looking for errors in grammar and you're looking to make sure references are in place. So at least 3 drafts. If you can give yourself time to do that, you will be giving yourself the best chance to show how good you are to your lecturers. If you speak English as a second language and you know you've got a particular issue, maybe with tense, maybe with subject-verb agreement, something, then I would have a special run through just for that, so that you're not looking for lots of things all at once. Go through it just once, looking for that particular issue to see if you can find it as well. Okay. So the first step, as we said, was analysing the question, getting a handle on what it is that you've been asked to write. The key to answering a question actually lies in the question itself. It lies in the words that your lecturer has used to phrase the question, to express the question. There are 3 different kinds of words. They're direction words, and that's your lecturer's instruction to you, telling you what to do. There are then content words, topic words about the general topic. So if someone said, what's your essay about? You could say, oh, it's about something. That's the general topic. And then the limiting words are your best friends in an assignment, because the limiting words show you how to focus in on your answer and on your research. So let's take an example, and we'll do this together to see if we can identify the different kinds of words. So have a look at this slide and see if you can find me the direction word there. What you're being asked to do. Discuss. Yeah. So you're looking for a verb, actually, a main verb telling you what to do. So discuss. If you were asked to do this assignment, what would you say the assignment was about in general? So we're looking for the topic word. Changes to legislation is a little bit too detailed. Legislation. What's your essay on? Legislation. But now we can look for those limiting words that will help us to focus in. So what are we going to focus in on? We don't have to write a huge assignment on legislation. Recent changes, yeah. So if we look at a change that's happened 20 years ago, we're off the track because we've been asked to look at recent changes. So recent changes for the legislation and... Okay, and we want the legislation that affects social and healthcare professionals. If we find legislation that affects education, we're off the track unless it affects the education of health and social care professionals. So if it's primary education, we're off the track. Okay, so direction word, discuss, topic word, legislation, and then our limiting words, recent changes, and then affecting social and healthcare professionals. Let's try another one. Anyone doing the research methods module? This should be familiar to you. So what do you think is the direction word there? Right, yes. Okay, what do you think are the topic words? Research protocol, structured literature review protocol, excellent. And how are we going to focus this? On your own study, exactly, on a study of your own choosing. So you get to focus in. There we are, there's. And the important thing is either or, so you don't have to do both. They're limiting words too. Okay. How about this one? Do we have any physios here today? Yeah? Okay. Does this look familiar to you? Let's start with this one. Let's start with the topic, the general topic. Not just physios, everyone can do this one. So, what's the general topic? That's quite detailed, but you're on the right track.
Management of low back pain.
How about just low back pain? It's about low back pain. But we can limit this to...
Mobilization, manipulation.
Yes, and looking for the evidence of it. So we're looking to find the evidence of the support for the hands-on approach for the management of that pain. So we're not just writing a big assignment about low back pain, we're focusing in on what's the evidence, how can we manage this. Okay, good. Question, is there a direction word there?
No.
Actually not, because you find the direction words in questions that are phrased as instructions. So discuss something or other, analyse something or other. If your question, sometimes questions are asked as a question, in which case the direction word isn't stated. It's left for you to fill in. So what do you think the direction word might be there that you could fill in? Discuss. Yeah. Yeah. So if it's a direct question with a question mark, you're going to have to fill in the direction word yourself, and it might be discuss or it might be analyse. Here, I think it would be discuss. Okay. So once we've analysed the question, we've gone away and done our research, and we've used our question analysis to help us do the research. We've got our notes, and we're just about ready to switch on that computer. Don't forget to do your plan. So a detailed plan after you've done your research, so you've got your idea of what it is that you would like to say. So now we're thinking about how to structure what you want to say for your reader. Now, what I have up on this next slide are ways that you can jot down your ideas, brainstorming ideas. So you could try bullet points, you could try a mind map, getting ideas down. But this kind of thing is not a plan. So if you've drawn a nice mind map with lots of different bubbles, and you have that next to you, you're going to be scratching your head about where to start. A mind map isn't a plan, it's a bunch of ideas. We've got to be more detailed for making a plan for writing. So there's an example of one where you break it actually into sections and into paragraphs. The little idea of what you're going to talk about in each paragraph. So paragraph 3, I'm going to overview the 3 main models. And then underneath that, how you're going to really support that paragraph, what you're going to say in that paragraph, how you're going to back it up. So that's a much more detailed plan. In paragraph 1, I'm going to define reflective theory, etc. So what you're going to do in the paragraph and how you're going to back it up. You can even go a step further, and with your paragraphs, you can write down your main point in a sentence. So rather than just introduce models, there are
three main models of reflective writing, or there are many models of reflective writing, but three that are commonly used, something like that. So you put it down in a sentence, and then you say what it is that you're going to then back yourself up with. So you're going to here probably use your explanation of the models with some references. So that's a detailed plan. That helps you to really understand what you're going to say and when. So when you're writing, you can look down and say, what was I going to say next? Ah, yes, that's right. And it helps. I want to just move away from a plan and think a bit more about a paragraph for a moment. Have you heard of topic sentences? Has anyone heard of the term topic sentence? Okay. A paragraph, there's actually a really good way of writing an academic paragraph, has three sections. The first thing is a topic sentence, and that is a sentence that tells the reader what the paragraph is about. It makes your paragraph easy to read. So you've got a sentence about what the paragraph's about. Then you've got supporting sentences that back up what you're saying. Could be examples, could be statistics, could be some theory, etc., references, etc. And then if it's a long paragraph, you might summarise at the end in a concluding sentence, or finish it off, or you might even provide a sentence that links the idea of that paragraph to the next paragraph. Okay, so instead of just starting a paragraph with, when they hear it, they open their eyes and look around for sound, and we don't really know what's going on here, we could start with something like this. Babies are more sensitive to speech than to other sounds. Ah, now we know what's going on. When they hear it, they open their eyes. So that's an example of a topic sentence. Now, let's go back to your plan. If you do a plan where the main point, where you talk about the main point for each paragraph as a sentence, what you've done is already started your essay, because when you come to write your essay, you think, what's my next paragraph about? And there's the first sentence for the paragraph. And then you back it up with whatever you've thought you needed. So that cuts down a lot of hard work and thinking time, because you've already got your paragraph started. Okay, let's go on to talk about using evidence. The important thing to think about when you're writing at university is that every claim you make in an assignment needs to be backed up. Now that doesn't necessarily mean it needs a reference, but it needs to be backed up. You need to convince your reader of what you're saying. So, kinds of evidence that you could use to support your claim. You could use your own argument or somebody else's argument. You could use expert opinion. You could use perhaps some legislation or some policy to back up what you're saying. Perhaps you're recommending a particular course of action and you might need some guidelines to back up what you're saying. You could use some theory. And of course, if any of this comes from another source, you also need your references. If you think about your argument, backing up what you're saying, it can help you actually to see where you need your references. So let's say, for example, that you've had a look at a study and you've thought to yourself, no, there's a problem here. I've got to explain what this problem is, because talking about strengths and weaknesses will show your critical thinking in an assignment. So you're looking at a study and you realise it's got a flaw. And you say to yourself, okay, is that enough? If I just say this study has a serious flaw, will that be enough for my reader? Will they say, okay, tick, that's great. Will it be enough? No, I've got to back it up, don't I? I've got to explain at least what the flaw is. It's a flaw in the methodology. So there's my next thing. It's got a serious flaw. Why do you say that? Well, there's a flaw in the methodology. Now let's say what it is that you've looked at this study and they've done they've chosen a cross-sectional study. And actually,
It should be a longitudinal one. To really get the results, to see how it's working, you should have a longitudinal study. So we're saying the methodology is flawed. We need to back that up. Why do you say that? Maybe. Why do you say that? Well, because this is a cross-sectional study, and actually the kind of study that the author would really need is a longitudinal one. Why do you say that? Now, are you an expert in methodology? No, not yet. So we're going to have to then appeal to some expert in study design to talk about it. So that's where our references come in. So if you think about backing yourself up, you keep on backing yourself up until you've got to the work of an expert, or you've got to something that is common sense, and your audience will just say yes. So for example, if your study had, the problem was actually that the aim was to find out the perceptions of service users, but what the person actually did who was conducting the study was to ask the health professionals. You're never going to match that up. So you're going to be able to explain that yourself, that these two things don't match up. But if we're talking about methodology, if we're talking about design, if we're talking about sample size, that kind of thing, we're going to need to appeal to an expert. Okay, so using evidence, appealing to experts, and of course if we appeal to an expert, we've got something from another source, we've got to reference it. So that brings us on to referencing. So the main thing to remember about referencing is that whenever you use a piece of information that comes from another source, it gets a reference. So if it's your idea, it doesn't get a reference. If it's your thought, it doesn't get a reference. If it's a piece of information from another source, it does. And that's the main key to referencing. So that would mean, here's a question. I found a book, there's a quote in it. So I want to put the quote in my assignment. So I've got same words, quotation marks. Do I have a reference? Do I need a reference? Yes, I need a reference. What about if instead of putting it in the author's words, I use the information but I put it in my own words? Does it get a reference? Yes, it does. Because if you think of it this way, it's the information that gets the reference. So the information doesn't change even if the words do. It still needs a reference. Okay, question. If you find one piece of information and you want to put it into your assignment, how many references does it get? 2. 2? Does everyone agree?
It depends on how many sources.
Oh, I'm just talking about this one piece of information, and I put it in. So it's not, the question isn't how many references do I put in my assignment, but I've got one piece of information, and I want to put it in my assignment. How many references? 1? Who says 2? The 2s have it. What are the 2 references that it gets?
One during text and one's in the
There you go. It gets 2. It's a little bit of a tricky question. It gets an in-text reference, and it gets a full reference. You might call that the in-text one a citation, so, you know. But yeah, you put it in twice. You put the reference in twice. A short one in the text, and then the full reference at the end, so that if anyone wants to follow up that point, they just look at the short reference and they can find the full one at the end. Okay, let's have a little go. If you have a read of this, can you tell me where you think the references should go?
End of intervention.
At the end of an intervention, so saying a person has the right to consent or refuse to treatment or nursing intervention, that's got to have come from somewhere, so we need a reference. Where's the next one, would you say? So, okay, it could be at the end of code of practice, or it might be that we've got 2 pieces of information from 2 different sources. If we found out about the law in one source and the code of practice in another, we might put 2 references. It just depends on where we got the information from. So the idea is reference goes at the end of the piece of information. So if you got
all of the information for the second sentence from one source, it would get one reference. If you got the information from two sources, it would get two references. Okay, that's good. Alrighty, now do we know about the referencing system? Do you know about the referencing system that you are required to use? You don't have to know it as in there's not a referencing exam. You just have to know which one, and you need the guide that your department recommends. So that should be available on GCU Learn for you. If you don't know which system, we generally use a Harvard system, but there are all sorts of slight variations. So you really need to make sure that you're using the guide that your department and even possibly your module wants you to use. So check GCU Learn, check your guides to make sure, check your module guides to make sure. And the good news is you don't have to learn it. All you have to do is have your guide open and match your references to those guides. So it's like a pattern matching exercise rather than, having to learn everything there is to know. So there's an example of some in-text references that you might use in an assignment. So if you use the author's name as part of the sentence, the reference goes in brackets afterwards, or you might use the information and then the whole, the reference goes at the end of the sentence with the author's name as well.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
What's the rules around putting the actual page number in?
Okay, you need to check your guide. Page numbers for quotes. However, if you've got your quote from a website and there are no pages, you can't put the page number in. So you're just as honest as you can. So that's across the board. If you use a quote, use a page number. Some guides also say, and I think this too, that if you've used a specific piece of information, you should also put the page number, because the idea of the reference is to help somebody find what you're talking about, follow up your point. So, but you need to just double check your guides there, because some guides say quite clearly just for quotes. So double check there.
Can I ask you as well about the referencing?
Yep.
If we're using figures, so if we're quoting a percentage,
Yes.
but we don't want to use an exact quote, so we're going to put it into our own words, but we can't put the actual
Oh,
figures.
but it was 67%.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
fine.
But
That's fine.
Okay, yeah?
Yes.
You should still do it with
Yes.
the
Yes. There are, when you're putting things into your own words, there may be some words that you really can't change, some very discipline-specific words that have a specific meaning, so you wouldn't want to change them because you would change their whole meaning. So in that case, you can use the word, or if it's a precise figure, you can use the precise figure, and that's where you don't have to put little quote marks around it. But it's a good question. And while we're talking about that, in terms of thesauruses, sometimes you use a word quite often and you're looking for another word. Just be careful when you use a thesaurus that you're not... the thing about words in the English language is they mean the same thing in certain contexts. So you have to make sure that the word that you found means the right thing in the context that you're writing in, and you don't have a strange word suddenly appear in the middle of your work. Okay, so to get your references, you might have to look around to find the publisher, to find the name, etc. So just be aware that when you've got a source, you might have to hunt for the details to find the details for your reference. Okay, question. What's plagiarism? Any ideas? What's somebody's definition of plagiarism?
When you take somebody's idea and use it as your own.
Take someone's idea and use it as your own. Take someone's information and use it as your own. Represent somebody's information as though it was yours. Okay, that's what it is. It's quite often accidental. How do you avoid it? Referencing. Okay. So actually,
you know, a lot of people, particularly if they come from an exam-based background, are a bit frightened of the plagiarism thing, but the way to avoid it is just to make sure you've got a reference for every piece of information that comes from another source, and then you will not have plagiarised. If it's a quote, you also have to make sure you've got your quote marks there. And there we go. That's the basics of academic writing for you.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.